I find that I'm a person who
Hello everyone. A while back I made a video on how capitalism drives both feminism and immigration. And I have had a little bit of pushback from this from a YouTuber, smaller channel called Zarathustra's Leviathan. I'll put a link in the show notes so you can see the thumbnail. I'll put it in there. And he had some questions and he had some kind of pushback on my basic thesis. And in this video, I'm going to answer his questions because I think it's important to get this right. He's saying actually, it's socialism that's driving immigration. It's the welfare state that's driving immigration. How comes it all started after Clement Attlee, etc. Well, I'm going to get into all of that and more. First, though, pick up a course at the academic agency. It's promo code SHREDDER. Many great courses. Foundations of Economics, if you're interested in this one, friends. Many other great ones. Shakespeare, Trivium, Politics, you name it. I have it there. Let's watch the ad. It's promo code SHREDDER. World-class education denied to you by school, denied to you by woke university. Well, no more. Pick up your course today. 25% off all courses with promo code SHREDDER. That's SHREDDER. Buy it now. Where should we start? Well, there are basically 2 points that Zarathustra's Leviathan makes in this video. The first thing is he says, look, there's a marked uptick in immigration in the period of the post-war consensus, starting with Clement Attlee and then continuing through successive Tory ministries, and then the period of Wilson and Heath and Callaghan. So all the way up to Thatcher, there's if you have a look, there's the Nationality Act of 1948 is passed, a Commonwealth Act, various other Racial Relations Act in 1965, all of which basically give the right of people who were in the Commonwealth to come. And he says, well, this is proof that it's being driven ideologically by quote-unquote socialism and not by capitalism. Well, here's my answer. Oh, yeah, and sorry, then his second point is that, look, capitalists, if it's just about kind of capitalist greed, why can't they just sell stuff in India? They don't need to bring Indians over here. They can just sell stuff in India, as an example, right? And I've got an answer to that, which is all about aggregate demand, okay, and the marginal differences between the British market and something like the Indian market. We'll get onto that as well. But let's cigar, by the way, still St. Louis Reggio, same one from yesterday. If you watched my video on Blair and Gaza, I record these in batches. Okay, so what's on my sleeve there? I can see something on my sleeve. Okay, I've been shredding paper for my compost. That's what that paper was. All right, so let us talk about immigration, capitalism, and socialism. The truth is that if you have a look at the period of laissez-faire, that is in the 19th century, there was actually huge mass migration in that period. From 1815 to 1914, Britain saw emigration of 22.6 million people from the UK to many other places, and of which about half of them, 12 million, were Brits going to the USA. That wasn't driven by welfare, that was driven by markets and opportunity. It was economic migration. It wasn't even driven by empire, because of course America and Britain had a whole war to settle that. So the emigration from the UK to the USA was purely driven by markets, essentially. So lots of those other emigres, by the way, would have been to places in the empire, various outposts. Australia would be another destination, of course, Canada, etc., etc. Then, in the same period, just in 1 year, in 1851, 520,000 Irish arrived, mainly owing to the famine. All in, about 2 million Irish arrived in the space of about 3 years. And as I mentioned in the previous video, Carlyle, whose books you can see here, constantly moans about the Irish turning up. Also in that period, about 150,000 Jews arrived in the 19th century, again, mainly driven by economic opportunities. Many of them, of course, were involved in finance and as industrialists, basically. They were tycoons. So, what I'm saying is, you can see in the period before welfare, there were still massive migrations going on. Now, the migrations were in different directions to the ones, they were generally people, it was a net outflow rather than a net inflow. But conditions were different back then. There was a massive population boom in Britain in the 19th century. And today, the population booms are happening in the third world. And lo and behold, the places, that are having the population boom are having the mass migrations. All of this is driven by capitalism. It should be obvious. Now, let's get to the heart of Zarathustra's Leviathan's criticism here, which is the period between 1945 and 1979, that is before Thatcher, after World War II. There is an opening of the borders during that. And I already touched on this in an episode of Reviewing Adam Curtis on Deepest Law, when we started watching Can't Get You Out of My Head. A lot of that immigration was intended as a one-off special for the dissolution of the British Empire. Basically, Britain had territories all around the world. The Empire was shutting down. The Empire was closing down. All across the British Empire, there were people from other races involved in the administration of colonial outposts. In some cases, they were also kicked out. Uganda being a famous example, Tanzania being another one. But, Priti Patel is one example. Her family was from Uganda. Idi Amin kicked them out in the 70s. They were associated with British Empire. They then came here. So, all in, let's call them the Empire Diaspora from 1953 to 1962, during this period of the Empire winding in and bringing back home all its agents and so on, about 500,000 people. About 500,000. So, what I'm saying is, this isn't because of welfare. It's not because of socialism. It's not anything really to do with post-war Keynesian economics. What it's got to do with is the fact that the empire was winding down, shutting up shop, and it had loyal subjects, basically, who were brought home. That's how it was sold to them. And you can actually watch interviews of people from the West Indies and from Africa and many other places who were specifically told by the British government, look, shutting up shop, time for you to come home if you want it. The invitation's there. That is what that was intended to do. And it's interesting because if you look at successive acts by different governments over that period, they were actually shocked by how many started coming. I mean, surprise, surprise, you send out an open invite and yeah, people are going to take it. And if you have a look at successive acts passed by governments in the post-war period, the post-war consensus period, and indeed by Thatcher, to give her due, actually looked to restrict immigration. The immigration restrictions were only opened up, properly speaking, from the time of Blair onwards. As I've talked about in previous videos, and they were really opened up by the Tory government from 2010 up until Rishi Sunak and Boris wave. So that brings us on to the second point that Zarathustra's Leviathan raised, which was simply, why can't companies just sell stuff in other countries? Why not, rather than bringing Indians here, right? Which you could argue was about lowering labour costs in the British employment market, which is what I talked about last time. He was like, look, if it's just about flogging stuff, why can't they just send it over there and sell it in India? And there are lots of reasons why it's more beneficial to these companies, to capitalists, to bring them over here. First, even though immigrants tend to have lower wages than the native population, so in a comparison with people here, they have lower wages, but in a comparison with people in their native country, let's use India as an example, obviously labour is a lot cheaper in India than it is here. Okay, so you bring the Indian over, you're still undercutting the local labour market, but you're still paying a lot more than it would cost you to employ that person all the way in India. And outsourcing does happen, of course, but for certain jobs, you need to have that person here. Whether it's skilled, that's IT consultants, things like that, or whether it's low skill, like retail, coffee chains, whatever. Sometimes you need to have a person here rather than employing them in India. What is the difference? Well, just to use Indians as an example, the median wage for Indians in the UK is 36k, £36,000. In India, the median wage is 2,680 for Indians in India. So that's a huge difference. Now you start multiplying that by thousands, tens of thousands, by millions, and the way you talk about it is, well, there's just a lot bigger spending power, consumption, and what you'd call aggregate demand is being generated by those Indians you're bringing over here and sticking on, 25k IT jobs or whatever. Those guys still need to do shopping, buy stuff, get TVs, buy cars, whatever it is. All the stuff they spend their money on is generating cash in the economy. This is what they call aggregate demand. Now, if you're a company, okay, you can squeeze a lot more money out of somebody on 36k than you can on 2.6k, right? So there is an incentive to make that 2.6k income guy a 36k income guy. Now, this sounds counterintuitive because, of course, last time I talked a lot about labour costs, but you have to understand that this is relative in different markets. The labour costs of that same Indian, right, who's used to earning many times less in India, he's getting a massive pay rise, but his massive pay rise is still below the local market rate. Okay, there's a bit of complexity in here, but you can understand how lower labour costs is still a driver, even though viewed in the aggregate, we're actually giving more spending power we're pumping more aggregate demand into the economy by bringing over these immigrants. Now, this also works with UK minimum wage, as an example. Okay, even somebody on UK minimum wage who's an immigrant, let's say working in Costa Coffee or in Starbucks or whatever, their spending power is still many times greater than the equivalent barista in India who would be working for a fraction of that, for a fraction of that. And of course, their spending power is then a fraction of that. So it's always the two things. Labour costs, yes, but also the aggregate demand. Then, if we have a look at the stuff you're flogging to people, and let's not forget that capitalism doesn't care if you're Indian or white or any other race, because money is all green, as Milton Friedman said dozens of times. Consumer good prices, and I've made tons of notes on this, so I'm just going from my notes here. Consumer goods prices in the UK are 300% more than in India. So, the same good in India is 3 times cheaper than it is here. So if you're a company, where do you prefer to sell your good? In India, you have to sell 3 times as many of that good as you do in the UK to achieve the same amount of revenue. I'll give you an example. The same pair of jeans, literally the same pair of jeans in the UK, bought on the high street, is 70 quid, £70. In India, exact same pair of jeans, made in the same sweatshop, £23. So if you're a company, where do you want to sell that pair of jeans? In the Indian market or in the UK market? It's better if you sell it in the UK market because your margin is that much greater. You're making 70 quid for the same pair of jeans. Right? And this is, if you want to talk about capitalism, it's all about the difference between goods and different prices. If you've ever played any trading game, Port Royal or something, you're going from port to port, you buy copper for 3 gems, you buy copper for, let's say 3 gold here, and you sell that same copper for 5 gold in a different port up the road. This is all markets ever. And the UK market, because of the higher costs of everything, it's just more beneficial to sell goods here in the UK than it is in India. And they don't want those prices to go down, right? Supply and demand. If the population decreases, right, that is, if aggregate demand goes down relative to supply, prices will go down. They want to keep the price of jeans high. How do you keep the price of jeans high? You keep the demand for jeans high. Now, in a population with a decreasing population, a declining birth rate, how do you keep the price of jeans high? You import more aggregate demand. You keep bringing people in who want more and more jeans, as an example. Okay, I'm using jeans. You can pick any market you want, and the incentive is the exact same. Which brings me to my next point here, which is that the per unit revenue in the UK gives companies about, on average, a 35% profit margin. Now just think, in India, selling the same pair of jeans for 23 quid, remember, the input costs of those jeans are the same, give or take transport. Okay, so let's just pretend the jeans were made in India. Okay, you have to build in the transport cost to get the jeans from India to the UK. Right? Maybe there's some business rates and things like that. But basically, there's still a huge gap in the margin. Probably the guy in India is making about a 10% margin or 5% margin, whereas the retailer here is making 35% margin. Obviously, this is advantageous to capitalists, to companies, to keep this going. Now, on the government end, now don't forget, these are capitalist governments. The government of Britain is a pro-business capitalist government by any normal definition. They don't see immigrants as people, really. They see them as walking units of GDP. Every immigrant who comes in is an extra GDP for them, extra unit of GDP. Why are they so interested in that? Because it's aggregate demand. And mainstream economics has been absolutely obsessed with aggregate demand since the days of Keynes. Now you can blame Keynes, right? But Keynes was a capitalist, right? He was a pro-market. Ultimately, he was a capitalist economist. Okay, he emphasized the demand side. The Chicago School, Milton Friedman, emphasized the supply side. Okay, but what I'm saying is you can't ignore the demand side of any economy. And so when even a figure like Trump says jobs, 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 why does he care about that? Why do politicians care about that? Because jobs equal GDP, GDP equals aggregate demand, people spending equals the economy is going well. The economy going well equals I can get re-elected, or I can say I made the economy tick. Okay, so there's the government part of it, but these are capitalist governments. Right? Nobody would say Donald Trump is not a capitalist, because he obviously is. Next point is that these companies who supposedly are just kind of, benign or something, really it's the fault of welfare, really it's the fault of socialism or something, spend large amounts of money lobbying for pro-immigration policies. And in Britain they do this through two bodies. One is the British Chamber of Commerce, and the second body that does this is called the Confederation of British Industry. So those are the two kind of big official bodies that are always pushing for, laxer immigration. They were against the recent Labour push to restrict immigration announced by Home Secretary Mahmood, as an example, right, where Labour were increasing the cap for skilled migrants. I think they raised it to 38k. The Tories put it all the way down to 23k or something like that. Well, why were they upset about that? In that case, it's because they want cheaper labour, as I talked about last time. So you can see business is always on the side of more immigration. That's why the Koch brothers fund so many libertarian think tanks. That's why all of these different multi-billionaires pump money through the NGO networks, which I've talked about ad nauseum on this channel. It's why USAID, up until recently, was pumping the whole system full of pro-migration messages. So, to cut a long story short, I reject the notion that it's socialism that has driven immigration. It's so clearly markets that have driven it. Capitalist greed behind it all, if you want to put it that way. Now you could say, well, greed is good, right? You could be a really pro-capitalist guy. That's fine, but you also have to, if that's your mantra, greed is good, or self-interest is the only thing that matters. If you're a proper libertarian, you have to own the fact that this also means open borders and pro-migration preferences and tendencies, because the incentives are always towards these things that I've outlined. Okay, a bit of a drier economics video today, but I think it's worth addressing some of these things head on. Now, on the welfare point, this is, it's true, it's infuriating when people come over and they're granted asylum and suddenly it's chain migration, and now there are 7 people who've come over for free being paid for by taxpayers, right? That is infuriating when that happens. But that is a small number of cases, okay? It's not, these are the ones that get people going and get people outraged and highlighted in the media. And, there are too many of those, okay? But a lot of the immigration, the bulk of it, the broad majority, is still the old-fashioned people seeking economic opportunities in the way I've outlined. It's also quite difficult, if you're a foreign national, to get any sort of welfare, okay? Those people that I'm talking about, the ones who get, benefits for 7 family members and so on, are asylum seekers. They're special cases in the system that are granted asylum right? That's the UK as a country saying, we're going to take our fair share of needy people from war-torn places, okay? Now, we know that a lot of those stories are BS. We know that that system is gamed. Absolutely, okay? I'm not saying it's not. But that they are still exceptional small cases compared to the vast bulk of those people. Those 10 million, 15 million people who've come in aren't those. They're people who represent all of this that I've been talking about, right? They're not people who've been granted asylum. They're people who are in either the legit economy or the semi-black economy, the black market, or just the black market, period. Okay, they're not actually allowed benefits, I think, until they beat. Is it 5 years? And then even then, you actually have to be a British citizen to gain access to all sorts of gibs and benefits and so on. Now, obviously, that goes on in various different communities, especially ones who've been here for multiple generations. Okay, and not all of these people work. I get that, but it is disingenuous to say that it's the main driver. The main driver is all of this. It's obviously all of this. That's why the biggest immigration came under the pro-market libertarian Tories, right, over the past 14 years. Clearly, demonstrably, most of the immigration came there. And you can see these people in life, working in coffee shops and driving Deliveroo scooters with L plates and, working in IT firms and call centers. And you can actually see these people where they are. They are working, right? And they are, you could argue, taking jobs that should be for natives and so on. I get all those arguments. What I'm saying is what is driving it. And what is driving it is basic business incentives. Capitalism. Look, I ranted so much. I didn't take a drag on this and my cigar's gone out. That's upset me. All right. Pick up a course at the academic agency. Promo code SHREDDER. Let me know if you've got any objections, questions, comments. I look forward to see what Zarathustra's Leviathan has to say. And I'll catch you later on for office hours.
If you liked this video, be sure to like and subscribe. You can join the channel for thousands of hours of past shows in the archive and hundreds of videos. If you have any questions, you can leave a super chat or a super thanks, and I'll be sure to pick it up during my weekly office hours, which run every Tuesday afternoon. I also provide courses at the academic agency, which I encourage people to buy. Thousands of students now have taken the Trivium to improve their skills in writing, logic and rhetoric. Just 3 of many courses available. Buy it now. But most importantly of all, friends, get out.